So hello everybody, good morning, and we're going to be exploring our talk on ethics and mindfulness and life without intoxication. So firstly I'll read the precept itself that we'll be exploring. With mindfulness clear and radiant, I purify my mind. I undertake to abstain from taking intoxicants that cloud the mind. Sura Meriya Maja Pama Tatana Veramani Sekar Padam Samadhyami. So over the last 4 weeks, we have looked at the other precepts, including not taking life, not stealing, abstaining from sexual misconduct, and not lying, which we can find similarity in other traditions. But perhaps it's awareness itself that makes Buddhism stand out from other mainstream religions. In Buddhism, awareness is seen as an essential part of spiritual development. Developing an aware mind leads ultimately to developing the enlightened mind, so that we too can become Buddha and benefit all beings. So this morning we'll be exploring the term mindfulness and its meaning. Then we'll look at classifications of awareness, awareness of ourselves, what liberates us from our past patterns and our conditioning, awareness of others and the world around us to transform our perspective and our emotional life, and awareness of reality, what liberates us from the delusion that is the root of all our unsatisfactoriness. Then, of course, I'll speak about intoxicants and where they stand in Buddhism, and give a short story from the Pali Canon, and then conclude. So, we have all heard of mindfulness. It's almost a brand name now, with mindfulness of this, mindfulness of that, and it's almost sold as a cure for all our problems. In fact, the mindfulness revolution is worth over $4 billion. But it all goes back to the Buddha and is actually defined as 3 separate Sanskrit words, which have different meanings. So there's smriti, which is usually translated as mindfulness or awareness, but its primary meaning is recollection or even memory. And similarly to the English word recollectedness, smriti is normally used to mean the state of being present in our actual experience. Sampajanya literally means clear knowing, something like mindfulness of purpose. We know what we are doing and we know why we are doing it. And apramada means awareness in an ethical sense. It's sometimes translated as vigilance. It means mindfully guarding against unskillful actions of body, speech, and mind. In fact, the Buddha's last words were said to be apramada samatatthada, which is often translated as with mindfulness, strive on. So taking these concepts together, we get some idea of the real extent of the concept of mindfulness and its crucial importance for the spiritual life. Without smriti, we will not be aware of ourselves to enjoy what we're doing or the world around us. And in fact, just be on total autopilot, kind of living in the past or living in the future, but completely missing the present. Without sampajanya, we'll continually forget what our life's about. We'll be drifting along aimlessly at the mercy of external events, never achieving our goals, or putting any of our decisions into effect. And without apramada, we'll not be keeping the precepts. So in fact, we'll end up just suffering as a consequence. Our actions are unethical and will have negative consequences, not only for us, but for others too. Essentially, without mindfulness, we'll have no choice, no freedom. Life is living us rather than we are living life. But as we develop more and more mindfulness, we develop the ability to consciously choose our responses to circumstances other people, and even see into the nature of our very own minds. So let's look at these classifications of awareness now. Bhante, Sangha, our teacher, uses the teaching on the dimensions of awareness, which I feel is really helpful to look at. So awareness has many aspects or dimensions, and Sangha identifies 4 dimensions of awareness, which are firstly awareness of things or the physical environment. Secondly, awareness of self, which includes the body, feelings and thoughts. Thirdly, awareness of other people. And finally, awareness of reality. And of course, we'll look at this now in more detail. So firstly, awareness of the physical environment, the world around us. When we start meditating, we become much more aware of the world around us. It can really enrich our lives. Think of the grass, the trees, the ever-changing sky, the cityscape of buildings, the wind blowing the clouds, as I can see out my window right now. Everything takes on a new clarity, a vividness, a beauty. And of course, the world we live in is very beautiful. But of course, we're often too distracted or preoccupied, too stuck in our heads to even see what's going on. In fact, if we could just pay more attention to the world, this could be one of the greatest benefits we can do ourselves. Meditation certainly helps, but it's also about a heightened awareness in our day-to-day routine. We can relearn, if you like, to look, smell, listen, feel, and even taste the world. And of course, to do this, we need to give ourselves time to do it, give ourselves the space. We also may need to guard against distracting ourselves with artificial inputs, such as practices guarding the gates of the senses. We could do something as simple as switch our phone off for the day, or have a mindfulness spell that rings every hour so that we can pause before we resume what we're doing. As Tara Brach says, in the space of a pause, truth can shine through. So now we come on to awareness of the self and awareness of the body. So always good to go back to the Buddha. And I know on the Sangha Night, Thursday night series, we are looking at the Mahasatipatthana Sutta. So I'm going to read briefly from that. Here a monk sits down cross-legged, holding his body erect, having established mindfulness before him. Mindfully he breathes in, mindfully he breathes out. He trains himself thinking, I will breathe in, conscious of the whole body. He trains himself thinking, I will breathe out, conscious of the whole body. When walking, he knows that he is walking. When standing, he knows that he is standing. When lying, he knows he is lying. In whatever way his body is disposed, he knows that is how it is. And when we do this, we become suffused with awareness. Our minds become calm. Our attention is taken away from our chattering minds. Our body is stilled, and we can feel completely at peace. So, of course, being mindful of the body brings rewards in its own right, but it's also the foundation of the other aspects of mindfulness. So next we go to feelings. So we talk about feelings, but we call it Vedana. So Vedana is the term for any feeling state we can experience. Vedana can be pleasant, painful, or neutral. Pleasant and painful Vedana generally sets up craving and aversion, which is the basis of all our suffering. Our Vedanas arise from past conditioning, and they're obviously sometimes not connected at all with any objective reality. Here's a Zen koan for you. Why is it that one person should love pineapple on pizza when another one hates it? I love it, by the way. So to free oneself of this craving and aversion is to end our suffering and establish contentment, even bliss, and finally freedom. So that's it, Buddhism in a nutshell. Easy, eh? Well, actually, no, it's not easy at all. We are deeply, inextricably, and unconsciously woven into and addicted to Vedana, and it leads us around like a dog. But the more we practice meditation and ethics, gradually, very gradually, the mist clears and we find there is a choice in every situation we find ourselves in. Have you heard of the practice called the Vedana of Vedana? When we find ourselves wanting or even craving something, being pulled or pushed around by powerful Vedana and caught in that compulsive energy it creates, can we ask, what is the Vedana of this Vedana? Not in a judgmental way, but out of curiosity and kindness. Where in my body am I experiencing it? Is it physical, intellectual, emotional, or all three? How strong is it? Is it a 10 out of 10 Vedana or a 3 out of 10 Vedana? Is it connected to a young part of me that didn't get what it needed at some earlier part of my life? What do I do when I stop and investigate my craving and aversion when acting on it? So really looking and seeing the gap, as we call it in the meditation, the creative opportunity instead of the reactive age-old response. And what we can do is literally hang out in this gap and take a look around, being fascinated just to see what this Vedana is made up of, where it might come from, how strong it is, and how we might best work with it. And maybe we can bring metta to it. The gap between Vedana and our response is our point of freedom, where we can escape from past patterns and free ourselves to act in a new and creative way. This only becomes possible when we are aware of our Vedanas without responding. Hence, mindfulness of feelings, in this sense, is a crucial part to liberate ourselves. Next, we go to awareness of thoughts. Our heads are so full of mental chatter. We're constantly planning the future, regretting the past, worrying about what people think, imagining what's going to happen, making up fantasies and assumptions. How long is Amalaketu going to talk for so I can have my lunch? These constant stream of thoughts gives us little time for peace of mind or enjoyment of the world around us. And what's worse, we take this mental chatter completely seriously and identify with it. So although it may be a passing thought, it can become a whole fantasy, which we take for reality. And in fact, our thinking is just like the weather, it comes and goes. And we don't have to take it seriously. We don't need to identify with it or pour energy into it. Instead, we can maintain a clear awareness of our thoughts. And in fact, we can take a step to liberating ourselves from it. As we learn to watch our thoughts from moment to moment, first in meditation and then in everyday life, we notice that flow of mental chatter often slows down and it can even stop. And this can be a profound experience, refreshing and bring a sense of peace. But it's not enough just to know ourselves. We need to know others. So awareness of other people. So usually most of us are not very aware of people in their fullness as beings who feel and experience as we do. They have a whole inner world and who are just as important to them as we are to ourselves. And if we're honest with ourselves, we often see people as objects who either exist for our convenience, to serve us, or else they're of no interest to us at all. So one way to change this is simply to pay more attention to people. This can include looking at them, really paying attention to people, so we can begin to see them as they are, as human beings in their own right. Unless we're aware of others, we cannot feel metta for them, and we can't really connect at a deeper level. Metta really is seeing the other person. When the Buddha became enlightened, it wasn't a cold, detached thing. He saw with feeling, with compassion. He saw everything as pure, as Shubha, which means beautiful. When we see things as beautiful out of metta, this is the experience of the Bodhisattva. So in a sense, we can say metta is wisdom, is prajna, which leads us to the last of the dimensions, awareness of reality. Ultimately, awareness in Buddhism is all leading to this point. The whole purpose of the precepts is not to make us a good person, a happy person, even a sorted person, but to perceive reality as it actually is, so that we can live in accord with reality. This is prajna in its deepest sense, expressed in the teachings of the Four Noble Truths, the Three Lakshanas, and in all the many teachings we will be exploring later in this course. Of course, as described last week, only the thunderous silence of Amalaketu can really express reality. It is so profound that it can only be experienced. So now let's explore the negative form of the precept. So I hope you're not going to be looking at this picture in a very wish-reaching, grasping way. The negative form of our fifth precept calls us to refrain from drink and drugs that cloud the mind. In Sangha words, mindfulness is fundamental to spiritual practice. One cannot begin without it. So it's not surprising that Buddhist ethical guidelines advise us not to do things that destroy mindfulness. Again, just to remind us, the precepts aren't laws to be obeyed, but to liberate us. Ultimately, it is our choice to do what we want, but we, of course, carry the consequences. So briefly, alcohol. We may have difficulty accepting this negative form of the precept, as for many people, drinking is just part of social life. But in this respect, there's a few things perhaps we could think about. Firstly, the precept doesn't actually advise us not to drink to the precept does advise us not to drink to the point that our mindfulness is impaired. For some people, this may not rule out some social drinking or the occasional glass of wine with a meal. Secondly, as with all precepts, what is important, we're just moving in the right direction, not necessarily that we'll immediately follow all the precepts perfectly. And thirdly, it can be unwise to jump ahead in our imagination to a point where we're further advanced in our practice than we are now and judge what this might be like from our present situation. At the moment, life without alcohol may seem joyless, but actually by the time we're ready to give up alcohol, things may look very different. So there's, of course, other drugs. It's not just alcohol, it's intoxicating drugs, for example, dope. But that obviously can really cloud the mind and last for days and days. And there's mind-altering drugs like LSD, magic mushrooms. And sure, some people end up being attracted to the Dharma because drugs can sometimes reveal the possibility of other levels of consciousness, even spiritual experience. But continued use of drugs is damaging. And having found the Dharma with its much healthier, more sustainable ways of expanding consciousness, why take the risks involved? And of course, there's other intoxicants. In, of course, our current age, there's Facebook, Netflix, Amazon, the news, consumerism, snacks, and so on. And these are just some of mine. I'm sure you've got your own list too. So now let's just go back briefly to the time of the Buddha, and we'll hear a story from the Pali Canon. So this is Yasa, the story of Yasa. There once lived a man named Yasa, of high birth and son to a rich merchant. He was gentle indeed, speech and thought, but he also had a lot of money, probably a millionaire of his time, and many, many followers and friends. Anyway, it's said that Yasa was residing, as he often did, in one of his 3 mansions over the 4 rainy months. And he used to have some serious parties. He was surrounded often by dancers, skilled in music and singing. He was indulging in the exceedingly grand luxury of sensual pleasures inside these mansions. And sometimes he never even came downstairs. However, one day, while he was going through all this indulging in his life of sensual pleasures, Yasa fell asleep early after a crazy party. Since there was no need for the dancers and his friends to entertain him, they also fell asleep. You can kind of imagine the scene, can't you? The drunk stepper of a crazy party, beer cans trashed around and people lying around. Obviously, it was the Buddha's day, so there probably weren't beer cans, but nevertheless, you get the picture. So you can imagine the hall being illuminated with oil lamps. And Yasa woke up very early and he looked around and he saw the dancers asleep, and it looked horrific to him. He saw people with hairs dishevelled, some with saliva dripping out their mouths, some mumbling deliriously. On seeing them, he suddenly realised he saw the disadvantage of sensual pleasures, and he immediately became bored of them. And he rose from his sleeping couch and put on his golden footwear, he didn't have any others, and snuck out of his residence. And he proceeded out, and for some reason he finds himself at the deer park near Varanasi, where the Buddha was staying. And as he got close to the Buddha, he called to the Buddha, "Oh, all kinds of klesha are tormenting and oppressing this wretched body, this large source of dukkha of all, including myself." Thereupon the Buddha addressed him with words of welcome and encouragement thus: "My dear son Yasa, this Dharma which I, the Buddha, already know is the Dharma which is not tormented and oppressed by any kind of klesha. My dear son Yasa, come, sit here. I, the Buddha, will teach you the good Dharma leading to nirvana." Thereupon Yasa was pleased and delighted, and taking off his golden footwear, he approached the Buddha, made obeisance, and took the seat at the Buddha's side, becoming one of the Buddha's disciples. So to come to the end of my talk, let's have a little look at mindfulness today in daily life. So meditation isn't something we just do for 20 or 40 minutes every morning and forget about it. Meditation involves a principle awareness that we can practice in every moment in our lives. While the time we spend on the cushion definitely has an effect on the quality of our emotional mental life, making an effort to practice mindfulness during so-called ordinary activities such as working, driving, doing housework, and spending time with our friends and families is also a very powerful practice. We often see these as impediments to practice. In fact, it's interesting to see a lot of people talk about practice as shorthand for meditation practice. So they'll say things like, "Oh, my practice is going well. I've been sitting every day." And this implies the rest of our lives is not practice. But in fact, everything we do is part of our practice. So we can use eating as practice. We can use driving as practice. We can use showering, drinking coffee, anything, just walking. No matter what we're doing, we can always be more mindful. We can be kinder and more compassionate. Even when we're on our own, we can be kind with ourselves. We can show an attitude of kindness and care in the way we handle objects. And we can always recognize when we're holding on in some way and learn to let go. Living mindfully in this way is incredibly enriching. It helps prevent the arising of unpleasant states of mind, such as stress and depression. And it also helps us to live with freedom, dignity, and with respect for ourselves and others. So thank you for joining me on YouTube.